Good evening. I'm Alyssa, Labyrinth's Events Coordinator. Welcome to this first installment of Writers on Writing, an ongoing series of conversations about process and craft, hosted by Amy Jo Burns and Anica Mrose Rissi, with acclaimed guest authors whose work can be found in various sections of our store. Thank you to Amy Jo and Anica for putting together this wonderful panel, and thank you to our co-sponsor for this event, the Princeton Public Library. I have the pleasure of introducing our guests, but first, some logistics. Books by our guests are available for sale. You'll find them on the table by the stairs and on our signing tables over here to your left. Tonight's conversation will be followed by an audience Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand up high so I can see it. I will run a mic to you so that everyone in the room can hear your question. Our event will conclude with a book signing. Thank you to our authors for being so generous with your time. You may pick up a book, get in line to have it signed at the table, and then walk upstairs or take our elevator upstairs and pay for it at the register on your way out. So after the event concludes, there's no reason for anyone to run up and down trying to pay for a book first. Please feel free to get it signed and then pay on your way outside. This is Labyrinth's final event of the spring, and it's a truly remarkable way to close out our season. We are fortunate to have 4 very talented and accomplished writers here with us today. I could easily go on at length about each of our guests, but I'm afraid we would quickly run out of time for the event, and I'm honored now to speak just a few words about our panel of writers and then let them get to their conversation. Amy Jo Burns' latest novel, Wait for Me, was a Today Show read with Jenna pick for March 2026. She is the author of 3 other books, including Cinderland, Shiner, and Mercury, which is a People magazine book of the week and an editor's choice selection in the New York Times. Anna Marie McLemore is the author of 13 novels, including Blanca and Roja, one of Time magazine's 100 best fantasy books of all time, and several National Book Award longlist selections, including Self-Made Boys, a Great Gatsby remix. Their adult debut, The Influencers, was named a Best Book of the Month by People magazine and The Today Show. Their latest novel, We Could Be Anyone, has received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, among others. Dexter Palmer is the author of 3 novels, The Dream of Perpetual Motion, named one of the best debuts of the year by Kirkus Reviews, Version Control, which was selected as one of the best books of 2016 by GQ, and the San Francisco Chronicle, and Mary Toft, or The Rabbit Queen, which was longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award. Anica Mrose Rissi is an award-winning author of more than a dozen books for kids and teens, including picture books, chapter books, and middle grade and young adult readers. Her essays have been published in The Writer and the New York Times, and she has also worked as an executive editor in children's book publishing. So Amy Jo, Anica, and Dexter are great friends to Labyrinth and the Public Library's events programming, and we're so happy to welcome them back to our event stage, just as we are so glad to be welcoming Anna Marie to our stage for this first time. Please now join me in welcoming our guests.
Thank you, Alyssa and Labyrinth and Princeton Public Library, and thanks to all of you for coming here, because the idea here is to be building creative community. Amy Jo and I go on regular walks together where we talk about everything, including our creative processes. And that writerly community is so essential to both of us. And we have been thinking about community building a lot. We've been thinking about how we give back to the community, how we gain from the community ourselves. And we wanted to put together a series of events that build on that, where writers are in conversation with other writers. And that includes all of you, because all of you are here because you think about writing too, whatever stage of the process you're in. So we're excited to not only talk amongst ourselves up here, but also hear your questions and your insights, to talk with you afterwards, and hopefully to see you again at the next event in the series. We'll get to that later. But we're trying to build an ongoing series that's an ongoing conversation amongst all of us, with different guests each time. And so thank you for showing up here, to being part of that at the beginning. We're going to start by having a panel discussion for about 40 minutes. Then we're going to open it up for all of your questions. And then we're going to be here to talk, to sign books, to mingle, and to keep things going. So that's a sense of what to expect. But today, for this first Writers and Writers conversation, we are talking about beginnings. How to begin, where to begin, how to find the strength to continue. All these questions that Amy Jo and I, on our little loops of the park again and again, talk with each other. And I can't wait to hear everyone's answers. So I'm going to pass the mic to Amy Jo, and she's going to kick us off.
Hey, everybody. Also, another important announcement. There are brownies in the back. So please, grab one when we're done here. But we thought a great way to kick off this conversation would be for each of us to read an opening line or two from one of our books. So, AM, we'll start with you if you don't mind. If you could read, the first sentence or two, and then tell us, when you're reading, what really draws you in as a reader.
Okay, this is the beginning of We Could Be Anyone, which is a story about a brother-sister con artist team who stage fake hauntings and then get paid to solve them, which goes great until they run into actual ghosts that are not very happy about that. I knew why people came to the coterie. They came for discretion. No photographs or photographers were allowed up here except for a few times a season and only with the express permission of the resort's hosts. So the question is, what draws me in as a reader?
What do you love to see in an opening? Like, what's the hallmark of a great opening to a novel for you?
I love to see a little bit of a weird point of view on something, whether it's a character who's coming in with a strong opinion about something, or something strange and unsettling about a setting, something that's a little bit like it's like that kind of discordant note. Like you don't have to know the problem yet, you don't have to know the character yet, but okay, I'm paying attention now.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Dexter, would you read for us?
Sure. Okay, this is from my most recent novel, Mary Toft or the Rabbit Queen, which is based on a true story about a woman who, in 1726, hoaxed a number of doctors into believing she was giving birth to 17 rabbits. Okay. First sentence. The convoy of 9 decrepit coaches and wagons that constituted Nicholas Fox's exhibition of medical curiosities rolled into the village of Godalming on a Friday in early September 1726, soon after sunrise. And what do I look for in an opening, or what do I like to see in an opening? Some promise that I'm going to see something unusual in the novel itself. Some indication of a pleasure taken in language and putting words next to each other. I want to be convinced that I should read the second sentence after reading the first sentence. Those are the things that I look for. Yeah.
Thank you. Anica?
I will read the entire opening chapter of Girl Reflected in Knife, which is my new YA novel about a heartbroken teenager who tells a desperate lie and starts to believe it. The opening chapter goes, "Listen. Be careful the story you tell yourself. It might become the one you believe." And in an opening, I want to be settled into some of the broader questions of the novel, even if I don't yet know what those questions are. I like what you were saying, AM, about that sense of dissonance, and Dexter, about the voice. You want to be settled in what the novel is, even though you can't actually know that yet from a few sentences, right? So when I'm looking for my own openings, which don't always come at the beginning of the process, and we'll get to that, I'm trying to settle the reader into something and plant certain expectations. But you can only do so much, and it's a vibe as much as anything else. What about you?
Sure. So I'm going to read the beginning of Wait for Me, and I won't say too much about it other than it's about a folk singer who has been missing for 20 years. And this chapter is called Missing. A farmer swore he saw it first while rocking on his front porch. His wife flickered behind the screen door, about to tell him to get his third can of Rolling Rock, his own damn self, when the house began to shiver. One window pane broke, then a second, then a third. I am so glad we are talking about openings because I've written 4 books that have been published It's the hardest part of the process. I usually will write 3 and try to keep all of them, and then someone will tell me you can't keep all of these. It's just so hard to get it right. So I think when I read, though, what I really look for is mood. And it can be a word choice, it can be a setting. I think Barbara Kingsolver has really good openings, and it's just, you have to make so many choices as a writer in that first page, that first sentence. So it kind of tells you, like, this is the promise that I'm making to you. And so I really look for, like you said, the word vibe, I feel like is really important. When you read any kind of like creative writing text, they'll often say you need to start in the middle of something, or start with action and then shift to backstory. What I love about all of our answers is they're actually as fluid as they are concrete, so you don't necessarily have to follow this strict structure of like, okay, if I want to get an opening that's going to hook somebody, I have to start with a bang, so to speak. There's lots of different ways to do it.
My ears perked up when you said you rewrite your openings so many times. And has anybody did any of you start with that opening sentence in place? Where did this story original start in your previous drafts, and how did you get to this opening you just read us? Dexter, do you want to start that?
Sure. With this book, I got pretty lucky in that the opening that I wrote from the beginning was the opening that I ended up with. Previously, I have written, this was also my quickest book to write. My writing, the time it takes me to write a book has varied between 3.5 and 14 years. So with my previous books, I have written, say, 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 pages and then thrown them all away. And then I thought, okay, now I can start writing the book. I once had a conversation with another writer who said it's important not to spend those first 20 pages clearing your throat. So that can be a thing I end up doing sometimes. So.
But sometimes we have to clear our throats for
Right,
us,
yeah.
right? Yeah. But then knowing how to get rid of it. Interesting. What about you, AM?
Oh, absolutely not. It's almost never the opening I start with. Sometimes it's the concepts of the opening, like what happens in that scene. But often the language changes a lot, like what I start with. In this particular case, Lola is talking to you about what the coterie, this grand resort that she and her brother are gonna fake haunt, what it's like for everyone, and then goes into how she's gonna screw it up for everyone because she's out for vengeance against this place. So this is a character who you will rarely see successfully be neutral. And I wanted to start with she's being as neutral as possible toward you as the reader. I'm going to give you factual information you need to know, but then you're going to get my really strong opinion about it and how I'm coming at it.
And I imagine you didn't know that character's very strong opinions until you'd spent some time with her.
I knew she had them because she was a character. Yeah. She's a character who has very strong opinions about everything, but I didn't know yet why she felt the way she felt about this place.
Yeah. Amy Jo, tell us how you got to this opening finally, and how you knew it was the right one.
And you'll notice, actually, if you open it, this book does actually have 3 separate openings. So so there's like a news article. Because I like mood and vibe so much, what I notice is that in my early drafts, it's all mood and vibe, and then somebody else reads it and they say, I have no idea what's happening. So I settled on this opening because it's very concrete. And I know I can trust myself to get emotion in later and that sort of thing. So I said, okay, of all the opening options that I have, what is the most concrete? Because sometimes a reader just needs something to grab onto. And this book does start with a meteor strike. So I thought, it's not a bad way to start. But I wrote this section probably first, but at one point it was in the middle of the book. At one point it was maybe 15 pages in. At one point it was before the news article. So something you can also do when you're writing is take all your pieces, maybe print them out if you like to work that way, and then shift them around and see what you might like as a beginning. Just because you wrote something in a certain order doesn't mean you have to stick to it. I would love to know, though, to me this is such a killer opening because you have that one line and then a bunch of white space. Did you always know you wanted that to be the opening?
No, I spent about 10 years figuring out how to make this the book I wanted it to be. and it went through a lot of radical revisions of the voice, the structure. The story was always there, actually, but I got to know the character better and better, and I got to know the voice better and better, and that's an unusual late-stage revision for me, but I did some radical changes to the voice, including, it's called Girl Reflected in Knife. It needs to be a short, sharp novel, and that sharpness came in these kinds of opening things. So my original opening lines are still in there, but they're actually later. And that's unusual, I think, that often, like Dexter was saying, often we're clearing our throats in our early drafts and we need to cut that out. This one, I needed to add something before. And when I wrote what are now these opening lines, that was 8 years into not just writing, but 8 years into revising, when I thought, oh, I understand this book now. By which I think I mean I understand what I want the reading experience to be, rather than the story or the characters or all those. This was one where I didn't understand the reading experience until later, and that was when I was able to form the opening of where do I want to situate you at the beginning. Whereas the novel I published before this, my opening line was the first line of my draft when I wrote my first draft, and it stayed that way, and I knew that opening in the beginning. I knew that reading experience. But this one I had to find. Yeah.
And, I would love to know, one of the things I always think when I'm starting a new project is, how do you know if this is an idea that's going to make it through to the end of a novel-length book? Because there's lots of ideas, but not every idea can become a novel. How do you know when an idea is something that you want to stick with through the course of a book, since you both have written multiple books?
I do end up... I have many more ideas for books that I think are actual books. Yeah. And especially since I tend to take a long time, I have to sort of ask myself, is this something that I want to spend thinking about day after day for several years? It helps that I've worked with now the same editor for this is my third book with him now, The Work in Progress. And so when I'm discussing projects with him, I can just sort of bounce ideas off of him. And so we can sort of come to an agreement about which book I want to spend my time on, which book he thinks is best for my career at this particular point, and things like that. So,
have you had to let go of something that you really wanted to pursue because you disagreed with your editor?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah. That means you're in sync, kind of, right?
I mean, I have sort of said, here are two possible ideas for future work, and then his response was, as your editor, I would enjoy idea A, but my fiduciary duty to you suggests that you should do idea B.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So you like to do that more at the beginning of the process, say, than write 10, 50 pages of each and sort of see what you're feeling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I have, again, I have a sort of a good relationship with my editor, so I can, he has saved me from myself a couple times. And
what a gift.
in early days of the project,
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, thank you. A.M., what about you?
I tend to give ideas a lot of breathing space to see how much they're gonna bother me and how much they're not gonna leave me alone, because that's when I know I'm really onto something. If I'm actively trying to do other things and I keep sort of seeing how something would go, I'm much more story based in terms of whether something is really an idea I can go with, because I think you can get to know and get to love a lot of characters. They may not always be meant for novels. They may be meant for short stories. They may be meant for a different form. So that idea of story and what's going to happen in this character's life, what lie that they tell themselves are they going to follow all the way to the end until they unlearn it. And when I get that sense of the story, that's when I think, okay, there's something here.
What lie is going to follow them all the way until the end, until they unlearn it? I love that. And when you say giving breathing space, what does that look like practically? Does that mean you've got something, an idea in your mind while you're actively working on a different project, or does it mean you have space from writing altogether? Because you've written quite a few books, right? So I'm curious about, do you have something on the boilerplate in your head while you're figuring, you know what I mean?
Usually not. I like to really be in the book I'm writing. I don't think too far ahead. So it's typically when I've turned in a draft and I'm trying to like piece my life back together after like deadline brain, where I've ignored many things, and I'm sort of catching up on the administrivia of life and things I need to do, or when I'm traveling and my brain is sort of somewhere else. I'm in different settings, I'm hiking or whatever it is. When I'm doing something that isn't writing and stuff keeps coming back to me, that's kind of when my brain clears out a little bit, and then the next story starts to come in. I do admire like writers who are juggling a bunch of different stories at once. It's not really the way my brain works, but I know that works for a lot of writers.
It does. Screenwriters in particular really juggle that. And I have a friend who will work on one project in the morning and then switch to another project in the afternoon, and that blows my mind. Anica, you have the unique experience of being a writer, but also being an editor. So I would love to hear, what's your perspective on how you know, or how you go through the process to find out whether you have an idea that's going to stick?
When I was an editor, it was my job to believe deeply in what a project was going to become, talk the rest of my team, the sales, the marketing departments, all of those people into this vision of what it was going to be, and believe in it even when the author herself was losing faith. Mm-hmm. As an author, I am the one who loses faith all those times. You have to have that, both those delusional, wow, this is going to be the best thing ever, and you have to get through all of those artistic insecurities that we all have. So you have that healthy, unhealthy combination of both. But it really does feel different. I feel, we all have to turn off our internal editor brain, and we all have to turn off our internal doubts. The problem with my internal editor brain is it's extremely authoritative because it worked as an editor for a long time and had that title to go with it. So that can be a struggle. Maybe because of that, maybe not. But I feel like for me, a lot of writing, especially at the early stages, is about tricking myself into doing this thing I really want to do, but I'm afraid of. And I have to find the ways to get past those fears by being very specific with myself about what it is exactly I'm afraid of. And so, for example, each time I am worried I am not going to pull off my creative ambitions. Yeah. And one thing I have to reassure myself is, oh yeah, no, don't worry, you won't. Especially in your first drafts. Yeah. Guaranteed to not be as amazing as you want them to be. And so that helps me release it too, right? And then there's my later fears about the publishing process, and those are more out of my control. But a lot of those, oh, here's what I'm afraid of that's stopping me. Let's just admit that's a very valid fear, and I need to do that anyway because otherwise I won't have done the thing. How about you? How are you deciding what to write next? Which ideas have the legs? What to put behind it? Yeah.
So my answer is that I actually don't know, and I have the most inefficient writing process of anybody that I've ever heard. I have to write about 100 pages of something before I know whether it's going to peter out. And so what I've noticed for me, the sort of magic number is about 30 to 35,000 words, which is about 100 pages. And if I still have more to say after that, then I think, okay, this is something worth pushing through to the end. Because I have a lot of ideas that for whatever reason, I'll get to like page 45 and then it's sort of dead in the water. Why that happens, I don't know. I do think there's something important risk-wise that you do have to be a little scared. I think if you're scared, it's a good sign. And if you're not scared, there's probably something missing because it's not going to be exciting for you. So I'm somebody that sort of jumps in with both feet, and then I often have to jump back out. And it's just the way my brain works. So it's inefficient, but eventually I finish.
How much do you feel you need to know about a book before you begin? Each of you, like when you sit down to write, when are you ready to sit down to write? Dexter, you look like you know.
Oh, I do.
You know your answer, yeah.
Well, it depends. For my most recent book, for Mary Toft, I had started collecting source material for many years, not knowing that it was going to be a book, but it was just like a case that I was interested in. And so when I would come across like material for it, I would just like file it away in a drawer. So when I came to one of these like editorial pitching periods that I talked about, like I just happened to have all the data there. So I knew that it was a book. I had like roughly an idea of how it would be shaped or something like that. With other books, I have had like an idea of a beginning and an ending, and I trusted myself that I could find the road from like the beginning to the ending, but the middle took like a lot of time that involved like changing the beginning and things like that. But I had some faith that I could eventually do it given enough time. So
I love that you were collecting a file on a pregnancy of rabbits. Yeah. And I think it relates to Amy Jo's question about how do you know when an idea is going to have that staying power. We have to follow our own oddities and obsessions, right? And
right, yeah. I collected a bunch of PDFs of 18th century medical journals, things like that. So yeah.
amazing. What about you, AM? What do you like to know about a book when you sit down to write it? What do you need to already have to begin writing?
So I often have this phase where I know a couple of things about the story. I know I want to do this, but there's something missing. It's like an ingredient in a recipe. It's like what is this missing here? And when I find that thing, it's like the entire world of the story illuminates. It's like everything goes into color. And with We Could Be Anyone, I knew I wanted to write like a highly fictionalized version of the ridiculous world that was Hearst Castle. And I knew I wanted to write about this brother-sister con artist team. Fun fact, this once upon a time started as a Hansel and Gretel retelling. And it's kind of under there somewhere. But there was something missing. And shout out to Alex Viasante in the audience who helped me find this something missing by getting me onto Los Spookies. If you haven't seen it, it's a great show. And I thought I want to do something like this. Historical. So when I find that sort of, I don't know if it's often kind of just this. It feels out of left field when it first comes in, but then it's obvious. This is what it was always meant to be. Sort of like that feeling you have when you hit the revision that makes you say this is what the book was always meant to be. Yeah.
So that sort of that discovery that you need to make that brings it all together, it seems like that would be different each time for each book. But are the elements of things you know in the beginning, do those tend to be similar for you? Like I tend to have a sense of setting and character dynamics, or is it just that that's where this book started, but a different book might start with an entirely different kind of knowing?
Yeah, they all start in different places, but there usually are a couple of things where like this is what's drawing me in. Like these are the shiny objects that keep me coming back to this story I want to work on. And what is it that turns it from shiny objects into a constellation? Like what is missing here?
So Amy Jo, when you sit down to write those 40 pages to see if an idea has legs, is that where you're figuring out the beginnings of what you even know, or do you need to know something before you start those 40 pages?
I think each book has started with one scene that I can see extremely clearly, and that's it. And the rest of it is kind of black. And what's interesting about it is it never ends up being the most important scene in the book. It just is something that I can see so clearly. And as long as I have that as sort of like an anchor to return to, and it's setting, it's vibe, it's all those things, then that is sort of what gives me the strength to push forward, because I will change a lot of things. My plot changes wildly from draft to draft. I add characters in, I take characters out, but usually there's that one scene. Like if I can get one scene exactly right and it sounds the way I want it to sound and it has the emotion I want it to have, then that can sort of be the thing that I return to that says, okay, this is what I want this project to be. So if I don't have that, I can't start. Yeah. How about you?
I think, like Dexter, I tend to have a sense of something maybe in the beginning and someplace maybe that I'm going, and maybe something that happens in the middle there. I read an interview with Lauren Groff where she was asked about the difference between writing her short stories and writing her novels. And she said something about that every short story is, I'm going to butcher this terribly, but every short story is built around a question, but novels breed questions in the night. right? That you wake up with more questions and more questions. And I do need a sense of not only those things, but also I think that for me, the book has answerable questions that I'm just writing to discover and unanswerable questions at their core that are part of what is drawing me to this story. And I need to feel those questions even if I can't articulate what they are yet. I need to feel that they're there and for them to have enough of an engine to push me through to discover things. So these things about the plot or characters or settings, sure, but then also some sense of that tension in me of the things I don't know yet that I need to discover, which may or may not overlap with what the reader will need to discover. Because there's why we write the book, and then there's what it is to somebody else, right? Yeah.
You know, you've mentioned setting a few times, and it's obviously a key part of any book. How important is setting to you at the beginning of your writing process? When do you settle on it? AM, do you want to start?
So for me, if I'm doing historical, obviously time period is a lot of it because I'm like with this book and with Self-Made Boys, which was my very queer, very trans Great Gatsby reimagining. It was really important to look at the details of setting because they're going to inform so much of the story. And I write a lot about queer community and trans community, so we always find each other no matter what age we're in. But the question is how. Yeah. So that becomes an essential part of the story, like the finding of each other. How does that work? How do we do it? Mm-hmm. And it's different by time period, and it's different by geographical setting too. Mm-hmm. So because that's so much of a core of the characters, not like their identity and also the sense of community, like how that looks and the making of that, which they may or may not know is possible, but they're going to find is possible during the story. That's part of the spine of it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And you know, Dexter, since this book is obviously very historical, what kind of tips do you have about like right on that in the first scene or the first few pages, how do you go about setting that scene or bringing the setting, you know, to your reader when it's historical?
Well, one sort of let me think. So, so I end up doing an unusual, what I wish were not such a large amount of research.
Yeah,
but it kind of.
I don't see how you can avoid it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, and the story that I think about when I was starting with writing this book was that I realized that I did not know what rural houses in 1726 looked like. And so I started to do some research, and then I found out that rural houses are like less documented than like houses in London and things like that. And so, but I finally found out that property taxes were contingent on the number of windows in a home. So that led me to believe that houses in rural areas that were poorer would be more dimly lit. Right. So I guess my advice is to read a lot of random things that you don't think have to do with the thing that you're doing. And then you'll just sort of like have it to be able to draw on. Yeah. And I do have like a very specific bit of advice, which is that this novel has a character who's a kid whose main purpose is to ask questions that the reader might want to ask. And that way, like, you don't have like these info dumps of text, because it's reasonable that a kid would want to know these things. And so, yeah.
And did you find you did most of your research before you put pen to paper at all?
It was like simultaneous.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I would get to a paragraph and then I would realize, oh, I don't know what to do here. And then 2 weeks later I would finish the paragraph.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And what about you with setting? Is that something that comes to mind for you right away, or do you wait a little bit?
That really depends on the book. Several of my books, I think about setting more in terms of logistics, right? So I need to know where these characters are and what they're doing and you know, what that means in terms of the size of the school and the classes in the hallway and how long they've known their friends and where they would have, like, sort of in the, okay, if it's raining today, that means this for your outfit, right? So many of them, it's sort of, or if you're in a city, you can take a bus, whereas if you're in a more rural place, right, those logistics of the characters enter in my first draftings, the beginning stages, and then later draftings, I'll be trying to make the settings more rich. An exception to that is my novel before this one, Wishing Season, which is a middle grade novel set on the island in Maine where I grew up, Deer Isle. And it's in fact set in my own backyard around a tire swing that I used to have. And that is a setting that is so important to who I am and what that book is. That book could not be set anywhere else. And it's the setting that I know so well, and it made it the hardest setting to write because I was so afraid I couldn't pull it off, which you have too. Your books all have an Appalachian setting, which is your experience. And then this one also has Nashville, and balancing this place you know so well in the ways that both makes it easier to bring out those details and harder because it's more intimidating with this setting that you had to do all this research and get to know. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So, like Anica said, I tend to write about home, and my home is in northern Appalachia. And this book was my first time stepping away from sort of what I knew and dipping my toe into historical fiction a little bit. And I have to tell you, it was so much easier for me to write about Nashville in the 1970s because you do all the research and you find these things, and just like Dexter said, these things, you're like, oh, this is interesting. And because from the beginning, you're looking at it from the outside in, and you can say, this is what I need to know. This is what's interesting. That building is purple. This one has, this building has church pews in it. There's, beer on the sidewalk so that sort of things, because you are experiencing it as a researcher for the first time, just as your reader will. But if it's something that you're really familiar with, you start from the outside looking in, or from the inside looking out, excuse me. And I actually prefer to write that way because I think it gives everything kind of a lived-in feeling, but it is really hard to nail it because you don't know if the reader on the other end is actually feeling what you're feeling. So that takes longer for me, and I have to rewrite things and then have other people read it and say, I don't quite know what you're getting at here. But to me, it's worth it because I want people to have the kind of love for home that I have when they read my books. I want them to feel what I feel. So it's worth it, but it takes a long time.
Yeah, setting is so tied to emotion in your books because of that, I'm sure. And one more question from me, and then we'll open it up to audience questions, although we have a million more to ask if you don't have questions. But so speaking of, this is the hardest part to write, and I don't know how the reader will respond to it. Are there things for each of you that you deliberately do not think about in the early stages of a project when you're writing a first draft, saying that's going to be something I deal with later? Is there anything that you sort of decide, I'm not going to think about that at this stage of the project while I'm beginning?
Yeah. So, I mean, unlike when I wrote my first novel, which I did basically for my own amusement, just to kill time, and then sunk cost fallacy made me finish it and then try to sell it. I mean, I know now that, like, for example, it's almost certainly going to get an audiobook. It's almost certainly going to be, like, translated. And those are things that are, like, sort of slightly different versions of the text that I have to force myself, like, not to think about. I mean, because if I think, like, for example, I talk pretty, like, regularly enough with my French translator, and I know, like, what her tastes are and things like, but I can't have her, like, in my head the whole time while I'm working on the book. So.
It's sort of adding too many cooks to your kitchen?
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. What about you, AM? Are there things you try not to think about while you're drafting or while you're beginning a book?
I have released myself from worrying about how much Spanish I can use in my books. I worry about that at a later draft, or how much context I have to give, because I do want it to be easy to understand, but I also, it's okay not to understand every single thing that you're reading. Like there is space for that, but in early drafts, I just don't worry about it, and I worried about that a lot in my early novels, particularly in my first novel, back when I was still italicizing all my Spanish, which I don't say it italics, so I don't know why I was doing that. It's what we were taught to do, to be good writers, to be good students. So I've gotten to this place where I especially in early drafts, don't really think too much about my communities being misunderstood. At least that's where I've gotten with being mixed race, with being with being Latin. I'm still working on that with gender identity. But yeah, more and more, I think early on, not you want your reader to understand the story and understand the character, but if you get mired in, okay, it is my responsibility to represent the identities, to give the primer on every single one of these identities that this character holds and carries and keeps within themselves, you're never gonna get to the story. It's just, and that, I think that held me back in a lot of drafts and made the writing process like longer than it had to be, and just a story should be taking up space in your head because you're telling something of this character's heart and something about their landscape, not because you think it's on you to give the entire textbook on who you are. That's why we need so many stories from each of our identities, so we can do it together.
Amy Jo?
I'll be honest. I think in the first draft, second, third, what I don't let myself ask is this any good? Because all of a sudden it just makes your creative juices shrivel. And so what I focus on more is like, where is the heartbeat of this? Where's the heart? Where's the heat? And if I follow that, then it sort of helps you get to the end. And then, I give myself a long time to not let it be good and say it is what it is. And if I still feel the heat, then I go with it. And then and I think if you give yourself room to play, it pays off. It's messy for a while, but sometimes you need the mess to figure out what you want to clean at a later date. Yeah. How about you?
My answer is the same but opposite to yours, where when I'm drafting, I will allow myself to spend a full day on a sentence to make it exactly the language and the rhythm I want it to be. And what I've allowed myself to not think about is, okay, but is this sentence going to be in this book? Is this chapter even going to be? Because the answer is probably no, but I think that there's something I am figuring out about the feel of the book by sitting in the sentence that long, and by getting it to a place where it has that feeling of click, yeah, that's it, even if it's not going to belong. So I think what I give myself permission not to worry about, unless I'm under a specific deadline, which is rare, but not to really worry about, am I writing enough? And does what I'm writing belong? I am my own boss, so I give myself the most reasonable, supportive daily goals, super manageable, like I'm going to write 200 words on each of the days I write, right? And I can do that and then feel like I have achieved the task, and right? And maybe I'll write 600 and wow, what an overachiever. Yeah. But like, right? Make it small so that I can sit in that sentence and in that moment of like, even though this is probably a waste of my time, I'm going to let myself do it. Yeah. So, yeah. We would love to hear your questions. If you have them, I will hand the mic over to Alyssa. And if you don't, she's just going to hand it right back to me. We'll keep going.
Hi, thank you so much for all the insight you have given so far. I would like to know how each one of you discovered your writer's voice, because as a writer, I'm really struggling to find my voice. First, when I read Bridget Jones' Diary, Helen Fielding's voice, I wanted to sound exactly like that Indian version. But as I grow, it's so hard to be so funny. But did you have your writer's voice from the very first book you wrote, or you eventually found it with the second, third? I just like to know more about it.
In my case, I find that the subject matter controls the voice of the text more than me having like a specific voice that's clearly identifiable from one book to the next. I mean, for this historical novel that we've been talking about, I made a sort of a technical decision early on only to use words that existed in 1726. And so that controlled the voice of the book. Whereas for my previous book, which is set in like a near future America, that voice is more like shorter sentences, like more slangy, things like that. So if I do have like an overarching voice between the books, it shows up in like the things that I'm interested in rather than like the shapes of the sentences or something like that. So, yeah.
I think for me, I found that sort of voice clicking into place when I moved away from the stories I thought I should be writing, the stories I thought I was supposed to be writing, and moved toward the stories I was drawn to, the stories that looked kind of glowy to me, the things that, again, talking about shiny objects. That doesn't mean it was always fun to be in the writing. Writing can be very hard, but going away from, okay, this is the kind of book a writer writes, and going toward like what can I not stop thinking about? That's probably where I really started to find my voice.
I think starting by just trying out your own version of Helen Fielding is wonderful. Because you know what? Because you're already in motion then. You know what I mean? You're already headed somewhere. And then I would say, in addition to that, this may never end up in anything that you publish or anything that you write, but maybe just getting a piece of paper with a pen or pencil and writing down, what does home mean to me? Finding that sort of center for yourself, because I think that very much ties into like, why does writing matter to you? Why is this important to me? Why do I want to do it? I think if you can articulate just for yourself, like this is like what the stakes are for me personally, if I do or don't, it might sort of just point you at a horizon to head toward. I know that sounds kind of amorphous, but I think so much of writing, especially in the early stages, is how you speak to yourself. So being able to say, this is like where my compass is, and this is why I'm trying this. This is why I'm taking the risk. This is why I'm doing this, even though it might be time wasted. Just might help give you sort of like a little bit of freedom to say, okay, like let me point myself somewhere. And then you can always change your direction,
I think I have to find it for each project, each time. And that has to happen for me layer by layer, draft by draft. I get a little closer. And I have to listen to that painful voice that is telling me it's not right yet, because that's actually a really important compass. And then I have to assure myself it doesn't have to be right yet. I'm just getting closer and closer as I get to know it. So that's a great question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for putting this together. Okay, hold on. I'll just stand. Yeah, thank you so much for this. This is like my dream event from Labyrinth, so thank you guys. And I was really curious to know, in your writing process, in your first draft, how much of the words and sentences you write are actually legible, because I feel like my writing's kind of atrocious right now. And I don't know if that's just me, or if this is something that you go back and revise a bunch of times, or do you kind of self-edit as you go? I'd be curious to hear.
I revise constantly as I go. And I scribble things in notebooks and then type them up and change them and add a little. But I give myself, some people say don't revise until the end. The revision is the fun part for me, and the making it, so I let myself do it a bunch along the way, which doesn't mean I get to the end of the draft and it isn't a mess and illegible, as you're saying. So a bunch of both.
I'm team illegible all the way. My first drafts I do in a notebook. Sometimes I can read it, sometimes I can't. And for me, I just let that first draft, it's half sentences, it's images. I mean, sometimes there's a plot, it's not in order. And then after I get it all down in my notebook, that's when I get out my computer and I say, okay, let's try to make this maybe into something that's mediocre, But that first draft, it's if anybody found it, they wouldn't be able to read it probably.
When you mentioned, is it legible? Like whenever I do a lot of my drafting by hand, like early on, and a lot of my notes by hand, and they always have kind of a clock on them because after about 36 hours, I'm not going to be able to read my own handwriting. Yeah. So I'm going to have to guess what it is. But sometimes there's magic in that because, okay, I can't read this particular word. What might it have been? What might I put in its place instead, since I am never going to read it? And several handwriting experts have not been able to read it either. So trying to find there is a lot of play early on for me, and that means it's going to be messier. But that's part of the joy and part of the magic of it to me.
I would say that, like, so I used to, my first 2 books, I wrote the first drafts by hand, and that is just like notebooks full of chicken scratch to the uninterested person. I've switched over to using Scrivener as a word processor, and so I have like sort of a document that has like the actual story that's happening, and then a bunch of notes on the side that are code that only makes sense to me. So, yeah.
Thank you all for doing this. I'm curious. I know Anica's spoken to this a little bit, but I was curious how you all approach juggling different writing ideas, different professional commitments, different life commitments with your writing. Thank you.
I set myself a target of, right now it's 400 words a day. I don't always hit that. I try to sort of like turn off my phone and like unplug my router to, to do that kind of thing so that I'm not being annoyed or attracted by, by distractions and things like that.
Anica, when you were talking about setting the word count low, setting the goals low, that's really important for me because I would rather exceed what I'm going to do than get discouraged. So that really helps me manage things. I think this is partially ADHD brain, but I break things down into ridiculously small tasks so that I can feel good about doing this and then this. It's almost like making a little video game for myself. Like we're breaking things down so incrementally that it can almost start, on some days at least, almost start to feel fun, because just getting more done than I think I'm going to is always it's always, at least for me, it's going to be a more fun way of doing that. That's not how everyone works. Some people like to have a long enough list that they're not going to be able to get all of it. So I think the point being like figuring out what works with your own brain and what helps you transition best and what helps support you and your own brain best is so much part of this process.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would say if you can identify the most creative time of day for you and do what you can to protect that particular time, even if it's just 30 minutes to 2 hours, rearrange your schedule if possible. To let yourself write during that time. I will say, though, it is okay to not be able to do that every day. My schedule has changed quite a bit over the past 10 years. I'm a mom, and so when my kids aren't in school, then I can't work. So what I do, I have a notes app on my phone, and I will get ideas, and I just keep them in there, and that's sort of like this nice running log. So when you say, like, how do you keep track of your ideas, a lot of it is on my phone that I'll just take a note and then I can return to it later when I do have time. So something that will just like trigger my memory. That really helps.
Yeah, we have to be the ones to protect our own writing time because nobody else is going to do that for us. And we have to be honest with ourselves about what can and can't fit in our life in that moment, in that day, in that week, and just trust that there's ebbs and flows of it, and that's okay. That's how it goes.
I would say, and I think you would say the same, that like the word limit I set for myself is aspirational, and sometimes I exceed it, and sometimes I don't, and then sometimes I have like days when I write like 1,000 words, and it's a guarantee that the next day I'm going to throw away like 600, but that's fine. Yeah.
Would each of you pick an opening sentence or an opening scene from a book or perhaps a play that to you was like, wow, that is how to open? This is, not that I'm going to imitate it, but this remains an exemplar to me of how to open a story or a scene.
Does everyone have passages memorized? I've got two for you. I think there's reasons that we all love Charlotte's Web and that opening is so famous. Where's Papa going with that axe? Raises a literal question in the mind of the reader, sets the tone of that, right? And then in terms of, we talked about voice for an opening and just setting you in a story. M.T. Anderson's Feed starts, "We went to the moon to have fun, but the moon turned out to completely suck."
I wish I had it memorized what I wanted to say like that, because that was so great. But I think the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver is, it's something, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but something like, imagine a ruin so strange, ... And she just sets instant mood. So I recommend that. Yeah.
So the first one that came to mind was Julian Winter's As You Walk On By. And I don't have the opening memorized, but the opening chapter is called Rules of a Dare. And this character is immediately telling you, like talking to you like you are about to be in this game of truth or dare with his friends. Here's what you need to know. Don't fall for this. Don't do this one. Don't agree to this. As though you're immediately about to be dropped into this right alongside him. And I just like, that's such a memorable one for me, because you're getting to know the world very quickly, and you also you're with the protagonist. Like, he's bringing you with him. You're together from the very first page.
Yeah, and there's a stake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't have anything particularly memorized, but openings that I very strongly admire that I myself will never write are openings with like unusual, like sort of orthography. And I'm thinking of books like A Clockwork Orange or like Ridley Walker, books where like the shape, the way the sentence appears on the page tells you something immediately about the world. I admire writers who can do that and then carry it on for several hundred pages. But yeah.
Thank you. We are going to be here to sign books and continue the conversation. We'd love to hear your questions. We'd love to hear your experience. But first, I have a question for you. So this is the start of a series. Yes. Dexter and AM, thank you for being here as our first guests. You were amazing.
Woo-hoo!
At the next installment in the series, we will have 2 or 3 other guests to bring new voices to the stage as well. And we're going to talk, first we talked today about beginnings, we're going to talk about middles.
Middles are my favorite. It's my favorite.
And middles are my least favorite. So we'll have a lot to discuss. We would love you to be part of that if you're interested in returning. Labyrinth often pauses events for the summer, but one date we were eyeing is Thursday, July 30th. So just a show of hands of, if you're interested in returning, would a late July date possibly work for you? I'm going to do a yes show of hands and a no show of hands. So yes, that would possibly work for me. I might come if we did late July. Okay. Any no, please wait until, okay, and then a couple. All right, and for you, we are going to have another installment probably in November, December. So, okay, mark your calendars for July 30th, because I think that was enough of a yes. And look for announcements about who will be joining us, and we'll tell all your friends to come and join this community too, because that's what we're here for, is to be in camaraderie with other writers. Hey, Dexter, where can people find you if they want to know more about you, besides buying your books here at Labyrinth and checking them out at Princeton Public Library? What's the best place to find you online? A website? A newsletter?
I do have... I'm kind of a recluse. No, I mean,
we like it.
I do have a website, dexterpalmer.com. I am supposedly on Blue Sky. My address there is Dexter Palmer, but I have promised myself not to be active on social media until I actually have a book done. So once I do have that done, then I'll be like sort of posting there again.
Great. AM, how about you? I heard you have a newsletter of some kind. Tell us more about that and other places to find you.
Yes, every author who's a part of that newsletter is brilliant, and you're one of them. My website is author.anamariemclemore.com, and I'm part of a newsletter called The Eavesdrop, which is 5 authors, including Anica, and we have conversations about craft, and each of us do different things in addition to the conversation about craft. The thing that I do is Cosplay Corner. Every issue I dress up either as a book character or I paint a book cover on my face. So this is theeavesdrop.com is where you sign up for that.
So it's a combination of craft and process and bookish fun and nerdery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ooh.
What about you, Amy Jo? Where can I find you?
I think the best place to find me is Instagram. I'm at Burns Amy Jo. I'm currently on pause, but I'll be back June 1st. I was also thinking, please excuse the extreme Luddite version of this, but if you would like to give us your email address, when we settle on a date, I will email you. I will not send your anything else other than things related to this, because I personally really dislike that. So just know your email address is saved with me, but it might put you at ease in terms of when we settle on a date. If you would like, you can come give me your email address and I'll make sure that we get you that date as soon as it's chosen.
Yeah, and we'll only use that for future installments in
Totally.
this series.
Yes, this series, absolutely. And how about you? Where can we find you?
You can find me at AnicaRissi.com, and I'm at Anica Rissi on Instagram as well. But this is theeavesdrop.com is our quarterly newsletter, and it's free, and it's only 4 times a year, and we're talking about process and crafts. So it's this kind of thing, authors talking amongst themselves, if you want that in your inbox as well. But come find us at the tables, come talk to us, talk to each other, other writers in this room. If you're looking for a critique partner, I bet you can find one here.